Let's start with something most people never fully accept. A narcissist does not disrespect you by accident. It's not because they're stressed, not because they had a bad day, and not because you did something wrong. Their behavior isn't random, it's learned. From a very early stage in life, a narcissist develops a simple but powerful belief. Control equals safety. And the easiest way to stay in control is to keep the people around them slightly off balance, unsure, seeking approval, constantly trying to prove their worth. When you're in that state, they stay in charge. This doesn't mean they sit down and consciously plan to hurt you. It's much deeper than that. It's automatic. It's a pattern wired into how they interact with the world. They test boundaries, they push limits, and most importantly, observe how you respond. If you tolerate it, explain it away, or try harder to earn their respect, they take that as confirmation. This behavior works. And once something works, they repeat it. That's why understanding this changes everything. Because the moment you realize it's not random, you stop taking it personally. And more importantly, you stop playing a role in a system that was never designed for you to win. At the core of everything a narcissist does, there is a game being played, a quiet, invisible game of control. And the rules are simple. The more uncertain you feel, the more power they have. They don't need to dominate you openly. In fact, the most effective control is subtle. It shows up in small ways: mixed signals, unpredictable moods, moments of warmth followed by cold distance. One day they make you feel important, the next they make you question your value. And without realizing it, you start adjusting yourself, trying to get back to that good version of them. That's exactly how the game works. Because when you are constantly trying to figure them out, trying to please them, trying to avoid upsetting them, your focus shifts away from yourself and locks onto them. Your emotions begin to depend on their reactions. Your confidence rises and falls based on how they treat you. And in that moment, they win. Not because they are stronger, smarter, or better, but because your attention, your energy, and your sense of self are now revolving around them. The dangerous part is, this doesn't feel like control at first. It feels like connection. It feels like caring. But over time, it slowly pulls you deeper into a dynamic where they define your reality, and you forget what it felt like to define your own. Now here's the part that's hard to hear, but incredibly important. Without realizing it, you might be helping this dynamic continue. Not because you're weak, not because you want to be treated this way, but because you're responding in ways that feel natural, kind, and human. Yet those same responses are exactly what keeps the cycle alive. When they pull away, you lean in. When they become cold, you try to fix things. When they disrespect you, you explain, hoping they'll understand and change. From your perspective, you're trying to protect the connection. But from theirs, they're learning something very different. They're learning that no matter how they behave, you will stay. You will adjust. You will keep trying. And that's where the shift happens. Because every time you tolerate what feels wrong, every time you over-explain, every time you prioritize their feelings over your own boundaries, you unintentionally reinforce the idea that this behavior is acceptable. It's not about blame, it's about awareness. The moment you see how your reactions are feeding the pattern is the moment you begin to take your power back. The first practical shift you need to make might feel small, but it changes everything. Stop overpraising them. It sounds harmless, right? When they tell a story, achieve something, or try to impress you, your natural reaction is to be supportive. You say things like, "That's amazing," or "You're really good at that." And in a normal relationship, that's healthy. But with a narcissist, something very different is happening beneath the surface. Every time you react with admiration, you are feeding a belief they already hold about themselves, that they are superior, special, and deserving of more than others. Your reaction becomes proof that their internal story is true. And when someone constantly validates that story, they stop seeing you as an equal. Instead, you become a source, something that exists to boost their ego. And here's the hard truth. People don't respect what they use. So instead of reacting with excitement or praise, you stay neutral, calm, grounded. When they expect a big reaction, you give them something simpler. "Oh, nice," and move on. No performance, no emotional energy. And slowly, something shifts. Because the moment you stop feeding their ego, they start noticing you in a completely different way. There's a deeper layer to this that most people never realize. When you constantly make a narcissist feel good about themselves, you slowly lose value in their eyes. It sounds backwards, but it's true. Because when someone becomes your main source of validation, you stop seeing them as an independent person. You start seeing them as something predictable, something that will always be there to boost your ego, no matter what. And narcissists think this way more than anyone. If they know you will always admire them, always support them, always respond with enthusiasm, then there's no challenge, no uncertainty, no need to earn anything from you. And without that, respect fades. Not because you're not enough, but because you've become too available in a way that costs you your individuality. To them, you are no longer someone to value, you are something to use. That's why pulling back your reactions isn't about being cold or distant. It's about restoring balance. It's about showing without words that you are not here just to make them feel good. And the moment that shift happens, the way they see you begins to change. Now this is where things start to become very practical. You need to master what can be called a flat response. A narcissist feeds on emotional reactions. It doesn't matter if it's positive or negative admiration, frustration, anger, even hurt. As long as they can trigger something inside you, they feel a sense of control. So when you react strong, whether by praising them or arguing back, you are giving them exactly what they want: emotional energy. A flat response cuts that off completely. Instead of reacting with excitement, you respond calmly. Instead of defending yourself, you stay composed. Your tone stays neutral, your expressions minimal, your energy steady. It's not about ignoring them, it's about not engaging at an emotional level they can feed on. For example, when they try to impress you, you don't light up, you simply acknowledge it and move on. When they try to provoke you, you don't rise to it. You stay grounded, like their words didn't land. And here's what makes this powerful. Over time, they start to feel the shift. Because when they can't get a reaction from you, they start losing their grip on you. Here's the surprising part. When you stop reacting, they don't lose interest in you. They become more focused on you. It goes against everything you might expect. Most people think that to be noticed, you need to engage more, respond more, show more emotion. But with a narcissist, the opposite is true. When your reactions become minimal, something unfamiliar happens in their mind. They start to feel a gap in absence of the attention and validation they were used to getting from you. And that absence creates curiosity. They begin to watch you more closely. They start wondering why you're different now, why you're not responding the way you used to, why their usual methods aren't working anymore, and that curiosity pulls them in. Not because you're trying to attract them, but because you've stepped out of the pattern they understood. You're no longer predictable. You're no longer easy to read or influence. And here's the key. People don't chase what they already control. So the moment you stop reacting the way they expect, you stop being something they can easily manage, and you become someone they start paying real attention to. One of the biggest mistakes people make with a narcissist is believing that if they just explain their feelings clearly enough, things will finally change. It feels logical. It feels mature. You think, if they understand how much this hurt me, they'll stop. And with a healthy person, that's often true. But with a narcissist, explaining your emotions doesn't create empathy, it creates a roadmap. Every time you open up and describe what hurt you, how it affected you, what made you feel small, you are revealing your emotional weak points. You're showing them exactly where to press next time, if they want a reaction. And they will remember. Not always immediately, not always obviously, but those details stay with them, stored quietly, waiting to be used when it benefits them. On top of that, explaining yourself sends another message you may not even realize you're sending. It tells them that their opinion matters so much to you that you need them to understand, to agree, to validate your experience. And to a narcissist, that feels like power. So instead of explaining, you shift your approach. You don't overshare, you don't justify, you don't try to make them see your side, you protect your inner world. Because the less they know about what affects you, the less control they have over you. Closely connected to this is something even more subtle but just as damaging: the habit of defending and justifying yourself. When a narcissist criticizes you, twists your words, or makes you feel small, your instinct is to respond. You want to correct them, to prove your point, to show them they're wrong. You want to be understood. But in doing that, you unknowingly give up your power. Because the moment you start explaining yourself, you're stepping into a position where their judgment matters. You're treating them like an authority over your reality, someone whose opinion needs to be corrected or changed, and that's exactly what they want. To them, your need to defend yourself is not a sign of strength, it's a sign that they've affected you, that their words carry weight, that they can shape how you see yourself. True power looks very different. It doesn't rush to explain. It doesn't chase validation. It doesn't feel the need to prove anything. Instead, it stays grounded. It knows what is true without needing agreement. And when you stop justifying yourself, something shifts. You're no longer playing on their terms. You're no longer trying to win their approval. You're simply standing in your own, and that's something a narcissist cannot easily control. There is a kind of silence that most people misunderstand. They think silence means weakness, avoidance, or not having anything to say. But in the presence of a narcissist, silence when used correctly is one of the strongest signals you can send, because silence removes the one thing they rely on most: your reaction. When they say something disrespectful, they expect one of two outcomes. Either you react emotionally, get upset, argue, defend yourself, or you collapse and try to fix things. Both give them feedback. Both show them they've reached you. But when you respond with calm, controlled silence, something unusual happens. There is no reaction to feed on, no emotion to grab, no engagement to twist. And that creates discomfort not for you, but for them. Your silence sends a message without a single word. You didn't affect me. You don't control how I feel. And for someone who depends on emotional influence, that message is deeply unsettling. Over time, they begin to see that their usual tactics don't work on you anymore. And when their tools stop working, they are forced to adjust. Not because you argued better, not because you explained more, but because you removed yourself from the game entirely, and that is where real power lives. At the end of the day, a narcissist doesn't respect kindness, effort, or even loyalty in the way most people think. What they truly respect is something much simpler and much harder to fake: a person they cannot control. Control is their language. It's how they understand relationships. So when they meet someone who reacts predictably, seeks approval, or depends on their validation, they instinctively take the upper hand. But when they meet someone different, someone who doesn't bend, doesn't chase, doesn't emotionally depend on them, they pause. Because that person doesn't fit the pattern. You don't react the way they expect. You don't explain yourself. You don't adjust your behavior just to keep the peace. You stay steady, grounded, and fully in control of your own responses. And that creates a kind of boundary they can feel, even if you never say a word. To a narcissist, that boundary signals risk. It tells them, this person cannot be easily influenced. This person will not stay if pushed too far. And that's where respect begins. Not from admiration, not from connection, but from the realization that you are not someone they can move, shape, or break in. That changes how they treat you completely. You've probably heard the advice: be less available. Don't reply too fast. Don't always say yes. Don't give them too much attention. And while that's not wrong, it's incomplete. Because if you simply become less available in a predictable way, they will figure you out. Narcissists are extremely good at reading patterns. If you always take longer to reply, always pull back in the same situations, or always act distant in a certain way, they adapt. They learn your rhythm, and once they do, they regain control. That's why the real shift isn't about being less available, it's about being less predictable. Some days you respond quickly, other days you don't. Sometimes you're warm and engaged. Other times you're polite but distant. Not as a strategy to confuse them, but as a reflection of a real life where your attention moves naturally. You're not orbiting around them anymore. And that's what changes everything. Because when they can't predict your behavior, they can't plan around it. They can't time their actions to control your responses. They lose that sense of certainty. And when certainty disappears, control weakens. You're no longer a pattern they can study, you become a person they can't quite figure out. And that's exactly where your power grows. To understand why unpredictability is so powerful, you need to understand something called the slot machine effect. Think about how a slot machine works. You pull the lever, and sometimes you win, sometimes you don't. There's no clear pattern, no guarantee, and that uncertainty is exactly what makes it addictive. People keep playing not because they always win, but because they might win. Now apply that to your interactions. When you are always available, always warm, always responsive, you become predictable. And predictable things are easy to take for granted. There's no excitement, no challenge, no need to invest effort. But when your behavior becomes unpredictable, when sometimes you're present, sometimes you're distant, sometimes engaged, sometimes focused on your own life, you create that same sense of uncertainty. And suddenly, they start pulling the lever. They reach out more, they try harder, they pay closer attention. Not because you're chasing them, but because they're no longer sure what they'll get from you. And here's the key insight. People don't mistreat what they feel they might lose. When your presence is no longer guaranteed, your value increases in their perception. They become more careful, more intentional, more aware of how they show up. Not because they've changed, but because the dynamic has. When a narcissist crosses the line, most people eventually reach a breaking point. And when that happens, they tend to react in one of two ways. They either explode, or they make strong threats they don't follow through. Both reactions feel justified. After all, when you've been pushed over and over again, it's natural to release everything at once. The anger, the frustration, the hurt, it all comes out. Or you draw a line and say, if you do this again, I'm done. But here's the problem. An emotional explosion tells them something very specific. You are deeply affected. It shows them that they have access to your emotions, that they can push you to a breaking point. And to a narcissist, that doesn't signal strength, it signals influence. Empty threats send an even stronger message. They teach the narcissist that your boundaries are not real, that no matter what they do, there are no actual consequences waiting for them. And once they learn that, they stop taking you seriously. So, instead of reacting with intensity or making future promises, you shift your approach. You stay calm, you stay grounded. You don't escalate, and you don't threaten. Because real power isn't loud. It's consistent, and it shows up in what you do next. If there's one shift that changes everything, it's this. Stop talking about boundaries and start enforcing small, consistent consequences. A narcissist doesn't learn from words. You can explain, argue, or warn them as much as you want, but it rarely leads to real change. What they respond to is experience what actually happens after they cross a line. That's why big speeches and emotional confrontations don't work. They create noise, but not impact. What works is something much simpler. When they do something disrespectful, you respond immediately, but calmly. No drama, no long explanation, just a clear action. For example, that's not okay. I'm stepping away for a bit. And then you actually do it. You leave. You disconnect. You remove your presence. And most importantly, you don't come back with resentment or another discussion. You return to normal, like nothing needs to be argued about. Over time, this creates a pattern they can't ignore. They begin to associate certain behaviors with a loss of access to you, not because you punish them, but because your standards are real and consistent. And consistency is what builds respect. Because in their world, where most people only talk and rarely follow through, someone who acts quietly and predictably becomes impossible to ignore and even harder to take lightly. Out of everything we've talked about, this is the most powerful shift you can make. Build a version of yourself that does not depend on them. Because here's what slowly happens when you stay around a narcissist for too long. You start to lose your center. Your mood depends on how they treat you. Your confidence rises when they approve of you, and crashes when they don't. Without realizing it, your sense of self begins to orbit around them. And when that happens, you stop being a person in their eyes. You become a mirror. A mirror reflects. It adjusts. It reacts. But it has no identity of its own. And here's the hard truth, no one respects a mirror. They just use it. So the real goal is not to change them, it's to rebuild you. You create something that belongs only to you. A goal, a passion, a routine, a life that exists completely outside of them. Something that doesn't need their approval to feel meaningful. And as you do that, something shifts internally. You stop checking their reactions. You stop adjusting your behavior to keep them pleased. You stop needing their validation to feel okay. And they feel that change. Because when you no longer depend on them, they can no longer control you. And when control disappears, something unexpected takes its place. Respect. Not because you asked for it, not because you forced it, but because you became someone they can't define, can't shape, and can't take away from. At the end of all this, there's one simple truth you need to remember. A narcissist respects what they cannot control. Not someone who tries harder, not someone who explains more, Not someone who stays loyal no matter how they're treated, but someone who is steady, self-contained, and no longer shaped by their behavior. And the real shift isn't in how they see you, it's in how you see yourself. Because once you stop needing their respect to feel okay, everything changes. Their words lose weight, their actions lose power, and you stop playing a game that was never meant for you to win. So don't try to fix everything at once. Pick one thing from this video, just one, the one that hit you the hardest, and start there. Watch what changes not just in them, but in you. Because the moment you become someone who stands fully on their own is the moment you realize you were never lacking power. You were just giving it away.